What if everything you were told about Atlantis being a myth was part of a cover-up? Why do ancient maps, forgotten ruins, and mysterious structures match Plato's account too perfectly? From forbidden archaeology to ignored satellite evidence, clues are everywhere. But someone doesn't want you to connect them. Stay until the final chapter, where we uncover what might still be buried, and who's making sure it stays hidden. But before we dive in, let me know if you're enjoying this kind of long, controversial history. Feel free to tap that like button and subscribe, only if you truly love what I'm doing here. And in the comments, share where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your city. I always love seeing our little bedtime crew gathering from every corner of the world. Now lower your lights, maybe let a soft fan hum in the background, and settle in. Let's proceed with tonight's quiet journey together. Chapter 1: The Legend That Refused to Die. The story begins not with a lost city, but with a whisper from deep time. Atlantis, a name that conjures images of golden towers, shimmering temples, and a civilization too perfect to last. Most were told it was just a myth, an allegory meant to teach lessons, not preserve history. But beneath the surface of that dismissive explanation lies a question that refuses to stay buried. Why does this myth echo so powerfully across millennia? Why does it align so precisely with real, unexplained events from the ancient world? As we trace the origins of the Atlantis legend, we find more than a story. We find patterns, timelines, geography, and global flood myths that defy coincidence. Something about Atlantis lingers like a memory too ancient to fade. And the deeper we dig, the more unsettling the truth becomes. Because maybe it wasn't just lost. Maybe it was erased, on purpose, by forces that still shape our understanding of the past. The first time the world heard the full tale of Atlantis, it came from the voice of a philosopher. But even he claimed the story came from older hands, passed down from Egyptian priests through generations. Atlantis, he said, existed 9,000 years before his time, a vast maritime power beyond the Pillars of Heracles, a city of rings, canals, and unmatched splendor. It fell in a single cataclysmic night. To most, that tale seemed far-fetched, a morality play wrapped in grandeur. But something odd happens when you line up his timeline with the Earth's geological records. The date matches a sudden global event, the abrupt end of the Ice Age, around 11,600 years ago. This was not a slow melting. It was chaos. Ocean levels surged, climate patterns flipped, and entire regions vanished beneath rising seas. The exact time frame the philosopher described. Was it coincidence? Or was he preserving a truth too dangerous for his era, and perhaps for ours? The academic world built walls around the Atlantis story, categorized it as allegory, myth, symbolic storytelling. To suggest otherwise was to risk credibility. And yet, that has never stopped people from looking. Explorers, scholars, and mystics all searched for a trace of this sunken world. They looked in the Mediterranean, the Caribbean, Antarctica, even the lost edge of the Pacific. What they found were fragments, submerged ruins, forgotten maps, ancient texts that referenced great floods and vanished lands. These were treated as anomalies, disconnected oddities that didn't fit the grand historical timeline. But anomalies add up, and when enough of them appear in the same direction, the noise becomes a pattern that whispers, "Someone got to the truth long ago, and buried it. The more they tell you not to look, the more you wonder what they're hiding. And in the case of Atlantis, the resistance to the idea has always been louder than the idea itself. Skepticism is healthy, but denial is something else. What makes the Atlantis story uniquely unsettling is that it doesn't exist in isolation. Nearly every ancient culture has a story of a great flood, a lost golden age, or a sunken city. From Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica, oral traditions speak of civilizations washed away by divine forces or cosmic events. They speak of a time when gods walked among men and when knowledge was passed down from mysterious ancestors. It's easy to call these shared myths coincidence, until you realize how detailed and eerily similar they all are. Could they be fragmented memories of the same catastrophe? If so, Atlantis is not just one city. It's a symbol of a global trauma, a shattered epic hidden beneath millennia of earth and water. It begs the question, if so many remember a world that supposedly never existed, who benefits from telling us it's all just fantasy? Consider the structure of the story itself. Atlantis was not described as utopia, but as a warning, a society that rose to great heights only to fall because of its hubris. Its power extended far beyond its city walls. Conquered lands, it built fleets. It developed advanced systems of agriculture, law, and architecture. These are not the details of fantasy. They're the hallmarks of a complex, functioning civilization. The kind that leaves behind ruins, artifacts, influence, and yet, despite its described scale, no one has officially found it. Or so we are told. But perhaps the question should not be where it went, but why it was hidden. Could a civilization that advanced have left behind traces that we misinterpret as belonging to lesser cultures? Could it be the root beneath Egypt, Sumer, or the Andes? Maybe we haven't failed to find Atlantis. Maybe we've been walking its ruins the whole time without realizing it. What if we've inherited Atlantis knowledge without understanding its origin? Ancient temples aligned with stars, megalithic structures of impossible precision, lost cities whose construction defies explanation using primitive tools. The echoes of a vanished intelligence hum beneath our oldest monuments. But every time someone suggests this intelligence came before the accepted timeline, the pushback is immediate. Because to validate Atlantis is to invalidate the entire foundation of modern history. It forces us to admit we know far less than we claim, that civilizations may not progress in a straight line, but in cycles, rising, falling, and rising again. Atlantis may be the scar of one such fall. Its memory survived, not in textbooks, but in symbols, stories, and ruins misattributed to later peoples. The silence around it is not proof of absence. It is evidence of suppression, a history carefully edited to keep one chapter forever unread. The notion of Atlantis as pure myth persisted because it was convenient. It gave historians a tidy box to place the uncomfortable. If they couldn't explain it, they could at least dismiss it. But now, in the age of satellites, LiDAR, and deep-sea scanning, the evidence is becoming harder to ignore. Submerged coastlines with strange geometric patterns, circular landforms in deserts, ancient cities discovered beneath layers of mud and sediment that date back far earlier than expected. Each new discovery pushes civilization further back in time, closer to the date Atlantis was said to fall. And still, the official narrative resists. The question isn't whether Atlantis existed, but whether it can still be denied. Because what we're seeing isn't the rise of a new theory, it's the slow collapse of an old lie. Throughout history, certain ideas have been buried not because they were false, but because they were dangerous. Atlantis is one of them. If it was real, it forces us to reconsider who we are, where we came from, and what we've lost. The idea that an advanced culture once flourished and vanished resets the clock on human civilization. It suggests that we are not the peak, but the continuation of something older. And that realization comes with consequences. If Atlantis fell, what caused it? Was it nature, cosmic impact, or self-destruction? And if they fell, could we? These are the questions buried beneath the myth. Not just where was Atlantis, but why did it vanish, and what does that say about us? The resistance to Atlantis has always been emotional. Fear of rewriting the textbooks, fear of ridicule, fear of what it means if the myth is true. But truth doesn't need permission. It waits, buried beneath stone and sand, until someone dares to uncover it. And throughout the centuries, people have tried. Their stories were often twisted or silenced. Some were branded as dreamers. Others were labeled as frauds. But a few managed to slip fragments into public awareness, enough to keep the legend alive. These fragments are now converging, a global puzzle that points to a forgotten age. Atlantis isn't rising from the sea. It's emerging from denial. There's a reason the legend refused to die. It was never just a tale about a sunken city. It was a warning disguised as memory, a civilization that soared too high, fell too fast, and was swallowed by the earth itself. But before it fell, it left behind echoes, etched in stone, mapped in stars, whispered in myths. These echoes are everywhere, and if we learn to listen, they begin to form a voice. That voice is telling us something we were never meant to hear, not just about the past, but about the fate of civilizations, ours included. And so we stand at the threshold of a forgotten history, a doorway sealed for thousands of years, now cracking open with each new clue. Atlantis is no longer an unreachable myth. It's a buried truth. In the chapters to come, we will journey to the places they said to ignore. We will sift through the anomalies, the ruins, and the maps that do not belong. We will follow the trail left by the forbidden and the forgotten. Because if Atlantis was real, and the evidence grows harder to refute, then its erasure was no accident. It was deliberate. The question is, who covered it up, and why? The next step takes us far from oceans and myths, deep into the heart of the Sahara, where something strange lies waiting. A massive formation, circular and ancient, matching every detail once thought metaphorical. In the next chapter, we will uncover the truth buried in the eye of the desert, a place some believe is Atlantis itself, hiding in plain sight, ignored, avoided, and curiously unstudied. It's time to look closer, because sometimes the greatest secrets aren't hidden. They're simply not believed. Chapter 2, The Eye in the Desert. They call it the Eye of the Sahara. From above, it's an enormous spiral, a strange bullseye etched into the earth. Locals call it the Rickhat structure. Most scientists label it a geological formation. But to others, it's something far more ancient, something that shouldn't be there. Its circular rings stretch nearly 25 kilometers wide, buried in the remote heart of Mauritania. From the ground, it's hard to grasp its shape. But from space, the resemblance is unmistakable. Concentric rings, central island. Water channels once flowed through its now dry corridors. It matches almost exactly the dimensions and layout described in the oldest surviving tale of Atlantis. If this isn't Atlantis, then it's the most eerie geological coincidence in history. But if it is Atlantis, why is no one investigating it? Why do the world's archaeologists look everywhere but here? And why does this massive anomaly sit unguarded, unstudied, and mostly ignored by the institutions meant to uncover the past? The Sahara wasn't always a desert. Thousands of years ago, it was green, lush, and alive. Satellite scans reveal ancient riverbeds crisscrossing the sands like veins. Some flowed directly through the Rickhat structure. In a time when oceans were smaller and climates gentler, this place could have been a paradise. An inland city nourished by water, protected by walls of stone and mud. Surrounding it, natural defenses, mountains to the north, fertile plains stretching out in every direction. The layout matches descriptions passed down from the ancient world. And yet, no one is digging. No one is mapping it seriously, because acknowledging it could destroy long-accepted narratives. The Sahara's transformation from jungle to wasteland was sudden. Climate records suggest a dramatic change, one that buried cities in sand and erased river systems in a matter of centuries. If a thriving civilization once lived at the center of this spiral, it would have vanished almost overnight, leaving behind only silence. Geologists say the Rickhat structure is natural, formed by volcanic uplift and erosion. But even among scientists, that explanation raises eyebrows. Erosion doesn't typically carve perfect circles. It doesn't create symmetrical rings with raised centers and sunken moats. It doesn't line up with myths written thousands of years before satellites could verify the shape. The geological explanation seems more like a placeholder, a story told to stop people from asking deeper questions. Because to ask is to open a door that leads into uncomfortable territory. If the Rickhat structure is not natural, then it had to be shaped by someone, and that someone had to have a reason. No civilization we officially recognize had the ability to carve or construct something so massive, especially not in a region we've long called uninhabitable. But that's the irony. What if the Sahara became a desert because something was destroyed here? What if it's not just sand hiding the truth, but the aftermath of catastrophe? The most curious detail is how few artifacts have been recovered from the area. But absence isn't always emptiness. It's often the result of neglect. There has never been a large-scale archaeological excavation at the Rickhat structure. No ground-penetrating radar sweeps. No carbon-dated samples from deep within its soil. What little has been found, tools, stone circles, and fossils, gets downplayed, filed away as nomadic leftovers. But even those fragments raise questions. The tools suggest human presence far older than the surrounding regions. The circular stone arrangements echo similar formations found near other mysterious ruins across the world. But here they're ignored, buried under bureaucracy, logistical challenges, and an odd lack of interest. In a world where governments race to uncover lost temples and ancient cities, why is this place left untouched? Perhaps it's not a lack of curiosity. Perhaps it's a choice. Because to dig here might mean finding something undeniable, something that would force the rewriting of history itself. Satellite imagery tells a different story. From space, you can trace what appear to be old riverbeds, dried canals, and sediment layers that hint at long-lost water systems. These rivers once ran directly through the Rickhat rings, feeding into basins and pooling in concentric moats. It's the exact kind of hydraulic engineering described in the oldest records of Atlantis: irrigation channels, freshwater access, bridges across circular zones. Some researchers believe the sediment patterns suggest ancient habitation, layers of human activity now buried under wind-blown dunes. And yet, major institutions have never commissioned a full-scale exploration. No headlines, no expeditions, only whispers. The satellite images are clear, but the silence surrounding them is even clearer. Every time an independent researcher tries to bring attention to the Rickhat structure, they are met with skepticism, mockery, or worse, complete silence. As if there is an unspoken rule: this place must remain unexplored. Not because there's nothing to find, but because there may be too much. The Rickhat anomaly sits at the center of an ancient trade route once known to early desert caravans. Oral histories from local tribes speak of a lost city buried by time and sand. Some even reference a flood. These aren't isolated myths. They align with stories told in Egypt, in Sumer in West Africa. They speak of a time when gods or ancestors lived in a circular city of abundance, one that vanished in fire, water, or sky. These myths always seem too far-fetched for mainstream study. But when the geography of these tales aligns perfectly with satellite-confirmed features of the Rickhat, the line between fiction and memory begins to blur. Myths often preserve real events, filtered through time and fear. If people once lived here, saw it fall, and fled, those memories would echo down through generations. They would become warning tales, sacred stories. Perhaps Atlantis is not a city to be discovered, but one we've remembered all along. Some believe the Rickhat structure was Atlantis' capital, while others argue it was merely one of many cities in a larger empire. Either way, its features defy coincidence. Plato described outer walls of red, black, and white stone. These stones exist in and around the Rickhat. He described abundant elephants. Fossils of elephants and extinct species have been found nearby. He described fertile land and fresh water. Again, the area was once a green savanna, full of life. And most notably, he located Atlantis beyond the Pillars of Heracles, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. Mauritania fits the description. Yet somehow, this site remains absent from official searches. They've looked underwater. They've looked in Antarctica. They've looked everywhere except here. And when something is this obvious yet continually ignored, it feels less like oversight and more like strategy. As though someone decided long ago that this was a door better left unopened. The question then becomes, who benefits from that silence? Why leave this potential key to ancient history unexplored? It may come down to the same reason Atlantis was dismissed in the first place. If you acknowledge that this place might be real, you must also accept that everything we thought we knew about the timeline of human civilization is wrong. You must accept that advanced societies existed before the first pyramids, that great cities rose and fell long before written language, that knowledge was lost, not learned. And that would mean the very institutions that define history, the ones that set the rules, got it wrong. For those in power, that's not just an academic error. It's a collapse of authority. It's losing control of the narrative. And narratives, especially historical ones, are valuable currency. Admitting that the Rickhat structure is Atlantis isn't just a discovery. It's a revolution. and revolutions rarely start in the halls of academia. If the Rick Hat structure is Atlantis, or even just a fragment of it, then what's buried beneath its layers may be more than ruins. It may include technologies we no longer understand, cultural systems that outpaced our own, mathematical knowledge lost to floods and centuries. Some theories suggest ancient energy grids, harmonic architecture, or astronomical alignments built into forgotten cities. These ideas have long been dismissed as fantasy, but only because no one has seriously looked. If you refuse to investigate, you can always claim there's nothing to find. But the absence of exploration is not proof of absence. It's a choice, a protective wall built around a narrative that's beginning to crack. The Rick Hat structure is not hiding. It is simply being ignored, and that's far more suspicious than any theory ever proposed. Because the truth doesn't hide. People hide from it. In this silent ringed colossus, time has preserved what politics and fear tried to erase. The wind cannot erase geometry. The sand cannot hide patterns visible from space. The past speaks in shapes, in echoes, in scars carved into stone. And those scars tell a story that doesn't fit the textbooks. A story of a civilization that rose before ours. One that fell hard and fast. One that may have left behind warnings, if only we dared to listen. The Rick Hat structure may be the first domino in a chain of suppressed truths. If we are brave enough to investigate it, we may find the key to a chapter of human history left unread for thousands of years. And perhaps that is why no one has touched it. Because to uncover Atlantis is not to find the past. It is to expose the lie we've called history. In the next chapter, we leave the dry heat of the Sahara behind and dive into the deep, into the waters that swallowed cities whole. Beneath the surface of our oceans lie ruins that shouldn't exist. Roads, temples, and stonework lie where no civilization is supposed to have ever reached. They sit forgotten beneath the tides, silent and waiting. Join us as we explore what the earth tried to preserve and what history tried to erase. Because Atlantis may not have been alone, and the flood that ended it may have drowned more than just a single city. Chapter 3. The flood that wiped it all away. It didn't just rain. The world shattered. Around 11,600 years ago, something happened. Something so sudden, so violent, that it changed the course of human history. Ice sheets melted at an unnatural speed. Sea levels surged. Entire coastlines disappeared under the rising tides. This event, known today as the Younger Dryas Cataclysm, is not speculation. It's etched into the earth itself, in layers of silt, scorched soil, and a line of black carbon that circles the globe. And here is where things become impossible to ignore. This disaster happened at the exact moment Atlantis was said to vanish. Not close, not vaguely similar, identical. The date Plato gave wasn't fantasy, it was geology. For centuries, this was considered coincidence. But coincidences don't leave impact craters. They don't scatter glass across continents. They don't create legends told by every culture on Earth. Something came from the sky. Something unleashed fire, then water. And Atlantis, if it truly existed, may have been the first to drown. The Younger Dryas period marked the sudden return of cold temperatures after a warming trend. But it was not a slow descent into ice. It was sharp, abrupt, and devastating. Some scientists believe it began with an asteroid or comet impact. one that hit the ice sheets covering North America. This would explain the carbon-rich black mat found across sites in both the Old and New Worlds. This mat is a thin, dark layer in the soil, filled with nanodiamonds, magnetic particles, and evidence of intense heat. Something burned the planet. Then, almost as fast, ice melted. Sea levels rose by hundreds of feet. Ocean shorelines expanded rapidly, swallowing land that had been inhabited for millennia. Imagine a city like Atlantis, advanced, coastal, wealthy. Now imagine it vanishing beneath an unstoppable wall of water. In hours, no time to escape, no time to preserve records, just silence. The earth reset itself, and all that remained were stories told in hushed voices to those who survived. We often think of human history as a steady climb, from primitive huts to modern cities. But the Younger Dryas tells another story, one of sudden collapse. Cultures that may have thrived were wiped out so completely that only myths remained. And those myths tell of great floods. Every major civilization has one. In Mesopotamia, a deluge sent by angry gods. In India, a sage warned of a rising sea. In Mesoamerica, the sky fell and washed the earth clean. These are not regional stories. They are global memories. Atlantis was not the only city to fall. It may have been one of many. A casualty in a worldwide extinction of culture and technology. But because we only know of history through what survives, anything that disappeared underwater or beneath earth was forgotten, except by those who remembered in stories. And those stories all begin the same way, with a flood so vast, it drowned the world. The aftermath of the Younger Dryas was not just physical, it was civilizational. Coastal regions where early cultures likely flourished were submerged. Trade routes vanished, agriculture collapsed. Survivors were forced inland into harsh terrain. In this chaos, knowledge would have been lost. Generations raised in survival mode would forget the technologies their ancestors used. Over time, tales of flying chariots, great temples, or global empires would sound like fantasy. But what if they were echoes? Memories passed down across firelight. Warnings wrapped in myth. The sudden change in climate marks a dividing line in human history. Before it, strange anomalies appear. Massive stone works, unexplained architecture, odd alignments with stars. After it, we see a long silence. Then, the rise of civilizations we now call ancient Egypt, Sumer, the Indus Valley. But what if these were not the first? What if they were the inheritors of a shattered world, rebuilding with fragments of a forgotten age? This theory was long dismissed as pseudoscience, but recent findings are forcing experts to reconsider. At Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, an enormous stone complex was buried on purpose around 10,000 BCE. Its construction predates agriculture, cities, and writing, yet it features intricate carvings, astronomical alignments, and advanced engineering. It emerged just after the Younger Dryas. Was this a surviving outpost of the lost world? A temple built by refugees from a drowned civilization? No one knows for certain, but its existence proves one thing beyond doubt. There was something happening before the rise of the known world, and that something left monuments too advanced to explain away. Perhaps Atlantis was not just a city, but a hub in a much larger, older global network. One that stretched from South America to Mesopotamia. One that fell all at once under a wave the planet had not seen in 10,000 years. Some researchers point to peculiar global features as remnants of this lost age. Massive stone spheres in Costa Rica, polygonal walls in Peru, submerged ruins in the Caribbean. All defy simple explanations. Many appear dated before known civilizations, and all could have been coastal cities, swallowed when sea levels surged. If the sea rose over 400 feet in a matter of centuries, millions of square miles of land would vanish. That's not theory, it's documented fact. And yet, the implications are rarely explored, because they threaten the timeline. They rewrite the narrative. If Atlantis was real and destroyed in this flood, then our entire understanding of history must shift. We are not the first. We are what came after. The flood didn't just drown land. It drowned memory. And from that silence, the survivors were forced to start over, building atop ruins they could no longer comprehend. There is another clue, hiding not in stone but in ice. Greenland and Antarctic ice cores record dramatic spikes in temperature during the Younger Dryas. They also reveal layers of ash and soot, evidence of global fires. Whatever hit the Earth didn't just melt ice. It set forests alight, darkened skies, and may have triggered volcanic eruptions. The planet convulsed. For early humans, it would have felt like the end of the world. And perhaps it was the end of their world. This wasn't a slow climate shift. It was cataclysm, one that could level cities, sink islands, and erase millennia of progress. We've long asked why there's no physical evidence of Atlantis, but we now know what fire, flood, and time can do. Wood turns to ash, stone crumbles, cities underwater are pulverized by centuries of currents and sand. The absence of ruins is not proof that they never existed. It is proof of how complete the destruction was. Black mats, those strange soil layers linked to the Younger Dryas, are found across multiple continents. They appear suddenly, filled with the remnants of burning, bone, and extinction. Beneath them lie the remains of megafauna and vanished ecosystems. Above them, the world changes. The mats are silent witnesses to a moment of planetary trauma. Some even contain chemical signatures associated with impact events, such as platinum, microspherules, and magnetic grains. They are not random. They are markers. They tell us where the fire swept, where the flood followed, and where something unimaginable unfolded. And within these black scars, we may find the last clues of the world Atlantis belonged to. Because even if the city itself is gone, its memory is sealed into the earth. The flood was not just a metaphor. It was a reset, one that humans barely survived, and one that erased whatever came before with frightening precision. The timeline is the key. Plato said Atlantis vanished 9,000 years before his time. That places its fall at around 11,600 years ago. The Younger Dryas began 11,600 years ago. This is not a poetic overlap. It is exact. It is too precise to ignore. And yet, for centuries it was. Perhaps because believing it requires us to abandon comfortable narratives. It means admitting that ancient humans were not always primitive, that they achieved greatness, then lost it, that knowledge is fragile, that history is not linear. Atlantis may have been the jewel of its time, wiped away not by moral failure, but by nature's fury. A cosmic accident that shattered more than land. It shattered certainty. The only thing left behind was the echo, and that echo lives on in every flood myth, every buried ruin, and every silence in the archaeological record no one can explain. Today, we build dams and towers thinking ourselves safe. But if the younger Dryas taught anything, it's that nature doesn't ask permission. It rewrites everything. The survivors of that age, if they existed, would have seen continents redrawn, oceans devour cities, and skies filled with ash. They would have passed down what they could in carvings, in stories, in warnings. And maybe that's what Atlantis really is. A warning, a memory meant to survive even when stone and steel do not. The flood was real, the destruction was total, and whatever was lost, it left behind only fragments, enough to haunt us, enough to challenge us. The question is no longer whether a global cataclysm occurred. It did. The real question is, what exactly did it destroy? Next, we plunge deeper into those ruins, the ones no one talks about. Beneath the sea, far from any modern city, lie stone streets, staircases, and shattered temples. In the next chapter, we follow those ruins into the ocean's silence. Because Atlantis may not have been one place, it may have been many. And some of them are still waiting to be rediscovered beneath the waves. Chapter 4: Secrets Beneath the Sea. The ocean is not just water. It's a vault, a dark, quiet place where time stops and secrets are sealed in silence. Beneath its surface lie forgotten cities, real ones, buried by rising tides and erased from memory. They are not legends or wild theories. They exist. Stone paths that lead nowhere. Staircases that descend into nothing. Massive blocks aligned in strange geometries. All underwater, all unexplained. These ruins do not belong to the civilizations we're told were the first. They predate known cultures. They defy the timeline. And they're barely mentioned in the textbooks, because to acknowledge them would mean rewriting the past. These are not scattered anomalies. They form a pattern, a submerged breadcrumb trail connecting distant parts of the world. And at the heart of that trail lies the same question: how many Atlantises were drowned before history began? Because if one city could be lost, then surely there were others. And the sea remembers all of them. In the Gulf of Cambay, off the coast of India, sonar scans revealed something incredible. Deep beneath the sediment, at depths once dry land, researchers found geometric patterns, walls, foundations, and long straight roads. The layout suggested a city, a massive one. Carbon dating on nearby artifacts returned a shocking date, nearly 9,000 years old. If true, that places it well before the Indus Valley civilization. The discovery should have shaken the academic world. But instead, it was met with silence. No full-scale excavation, no museum exhibitions, just quiet dismissal. Critics called the evidence inconclusive, but the underwater structures remain too precise to be natural. Here was a city swallowed by the sea, and no one seemed interested. Was it ignorance or fear? Because if this site was real, then it proved that humans had built, organized, and lived in cities long before we believed possible. And that would place it firmly within the time Atlantis was said to fall. On the opposite side of the globe, off the coast of Japan, another mystery sits in the depths. The Yonaguni Monument, a massive step structure, carved stone faces, terraces, and pillars, all resting 80 feet beneath the ocean's surface. Mainstream scholars insisted it was natural. But divers returned with photographs that told another story. Sharp angles, right-angled corners, parallel lines. Features unlikely to form through erosion alone. Local fishermen had known about it for decades, but it wasn't until the 1980s that the world took notice. And even then, the academic world turned away. No detailed surveys, no attempts to date it, and yet its scale is immense, larger than many ancient temples found on land. Could it have been a sacred site? A coastal city? A fortress built by hands long vanished? No one knows, because no one dares ask. The sea covered it, the tide silenced it, and history, once again, looked away from the ruins beneath the waves. Then there's the Caribbean. The Bimini Road in the Bahamas, a strange arrangement of giant rectangular stones sitting beneath shallow waters. First discovered in the 1960s, it has fueled decades of speculation. Some believe it was a breakwater or harbor wall. Others say it was a road leading into a now submerged city. Its blocks appear shaped and placed, not scattered randomly like natural formations. Yet, the mainstream view labels it a beach rock formation. Case closed, but the questions persist. If it's natural, why does it run in such a straight, intentional path? Why does it align with other underwater structures nearby? And why have no major institutions pursued further excavation? The Caribbean is full of strange underwater anomalies. Circular formations, massive stone blocks, even structures resembling pyramids, seen from above. One or two oddities could be dismissed, but a whole collection? That's not erosion. That's a buried history. A history with no home in our current understanding of civilization. In the Mediterranean, beneath the waves near Egypt, the sunken city of Heracleion tells another tale. Once a thriving port, it now lies shattered and silent beneath layers of sediment. Unlike the other sites, this one is accepted by archaeologists. Proves cities can and do sink. Proves that records can be lost and rediscovered centuries later. But even Heracleon's ruins hint at something older. Carvings, columns, and statues that predate the known city. As if Heracleion was built atop something more ancient. And what if that is the real pattern? That ancient cities were not always first, but were built on the remains of even older civilizations? If so, then the cities beneath the sea are not isolated. They are clues to a deeper history, one erased by rising oceans, one buried beneath generations of forgetting. And Heracleion is just one name among many. The sea floor may hold hundreds more, still waiting to be uncovered. New technology has made the search easier. LiDAR, sonar, and satellite scans now reveal patterns long hidden under silt and saltwater. Entire coastlines once thought barren are beginning to show hints of forgotten construction. Researchers have mapped submerged land bridges, sunken mountain ranges, and drowned valleys. These would have once been prime real estate, ideal for ancient settlement. And that's the tragedy. The most advanced cultures may have built their cities on the coasts, close to trade, water, and fertile land. But those same locations were the first to drown when the sea rose. That's why we find so little evidence. The best ruins are underwater. And until now, we didn't have the tools to see them. But we do now. And what we're finding matches the old myths too well. This is no longer about whether Atlantis existed. The question is, how many of them were lost? And what did they leave behind beneath the waves? In Cuba, Rumors of a sunken city off the western coast have swirled for years. In the early 2000s, a Canadian exploration company claimed to have found symmetrical structures and stone formations at depths of over 2,000 feet. Some of the shapes resembled pyramids, plazas, and roads. If confirmed, it would mean the site had sunk long before any known civilization. But verification never came. The data disappeared into obscurity. Further exploration was quietly dropped. And once again, a possible breakthrough faded into silence. But was the evidence flawed? Or was it simply too disruptive? Too hard to explain? Sites like this hint at a world map very different from the one we know. A map of civilizations we've never studied. Cities not mentioned in textbooks. Cultures erased not by war or time, but by water. And in each case, we're left with the same mystery. Not just what happened, but why no one wants to talk about it. Even mainstream science now admits that sea levels have changed dramatically since the last ice age. Estimates suggest over 20 million square kilometers of land were lost to rising waters. That's an area larger than Europe. Think about that. Entire continents worth of habitable land gone. And we're supposed to believe nothing important was built there? That humanity, intelligent and resourceful, somehow avoided settling the coasts? It doesn't add up. The only logical explanation is that many early civilizations did live there, and were drowned when the ocean came. We are missing a vast piece of human history, and it's not hidden in some far-off myth. It's underwater, preserved by salt, current, and sand. The world forgot, but the sea did not. Atlantis was just the name we gave to the first of many, a stand-in for dozens of lost cities. The myth survives because the truth was never fully buried, just submerged out of reach. And yet, despite the mounting evidence, most of these sites are not studied. Funding disappears, teams are discouraged, media coverage fades. It's as if some force resists these discoveries. Not openly, but quietly, with budget cuts, with academic ridicule, with bureaucratic barriers that make exploration nearly impossible. But who benefits from this silence? Perhaps it's fear. Not fear of the truth itself, but of what it changes. Atlantis is not a fairy tale. It's a symbol of forbidden history. A history where advanced cultures rose long before we were taught to believe, where knowledge came from unexpected places, and where the official story begins too late. The ruins beneath the sea threaten more than textbooks. They threaten control over the timeline, over the narrative, over the way we see ourselves. And that's why these cities are left untouched. Not because they're unimportant, but because they matter too much. Atlantis was always more than a single city. It was a concept, a stand-in for everything lost when the ocean swallowed the past. The places we found off India, Japan, Cuba, and the Mediterranean are not Atlantis, but they are Atlantises. Each one a drowned reminder that history is not as simple as we were told. They speak of builders we've forgotten, of knowledge washed away, of a world that ended and began again. And they show that Plato's story was not an isolated tale. It was a memory echoed across the earth. These ruins are not isolated accidents. They are the visible scars of a global flood. And what they leave behind is a haunting truth. We are walking through the aftermath of a forgotten age, one where cities stood, lives thrived, and the sea had not yet claimed its toll. In the next chapter, we meet the people who tried to tell this story, Researchers, explorers, and thinkers who saw the signs and followed the trail. They spoke of stars, cycles, and timelines that didn't match the official record. And they paid the price. Silenced, dismissed, erased. Join us as we uncover the battle over truth. A war fought in lecture halls, libraries, and forgotten journals. The flood may have drowned Atlantis, but fear drowned its messengers. Chapter 5: The Forbidden Historians. They weren't treasure hunters or mystics. They were scholars, astronomers, linguists, and engineers. But they all had one thing in common: they asked the wrong questions. The ones that didn't fit the script. They saw strange patterns in the stars. Flood stories in every culture. Forgotten ruins that shouldn't exist. And they dared to connect the dots. That's when the pushback came. Funding disappeared. Journals refused their work. They were labeled fringe theorists, pseudoscientists, even conspiracy theorists. Their credentials didn't matter. Their discoveries threatened a larger story. Because if Atlantis was real, if civilizations existed before the ones we study today, then everything would have to be rethought. Human history, as we know it, would be shattered. And that terrified the gatekeepers. These thinkers didn't want fame. They wanted truth. But in their pursuit, they found something far older than Atlantis itself: resistance. And as we follow their trail, we begin to see a pattern not just of discovery, but of deliberate silence. Take the astronomers who studied precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis. They noticed that ancient temples across the world were aligned not just to solstices, but to star positions thousands of years out of date. Temples in Egypt, Cambodia, and Peru lined up with skies from over 10,000 years ago. That shouldn't have been possible. Civilizations were not supposed to have had this knowledge. The builders of these temples, if the alignments were real, would have had to observe the stars for thousands of years. And that suggested something far more advanced than nomadic herders. These astronomers published their findings, quietly, cautiously, and they were laughed out of academic circles. Review boards dismissed their data as irrelevant. Their work, once promising, was ignored. The problem wasn't their math. It was what their math implied. A world that had known the stars before it was supposed to. A culture, perhaps Atlantis itself, that had watched the sky long before history began. Then came the linguists. They found similarities between ancient scripts across vast distances. Sanskrit echoes in Mayan glyphs. Sumerian roots in Native American tales. Egyptian symbols resembling markings in Japan. Too many connections to dismiss as coincidence. But every time they raised the possibility of cultural diffusion, of contact between continents long before Columbus, they were told it was impossible, that ancient humans were isolated, that ocean crossings were unthinkable. But the evidence persisted. Words, symbols, even shared myths about floods, gods, and lost golden ages. These linguists began to suspect there had been a global civilization, or at least a global exchange, thousands of years before textbooks suggest. They published, they presented, and they were removed, fired from universities. Their books quietly buried in library basements. No one disproved them. They were simply ignored out of existence. Atlantis again loomed in the background, and once more the pattern repeated. Discover, share, erase. There were also the archaeologists who uncovered strange alignments in sacred sites. From Peru's Sacsayhuaman to Cambodia's Angkor Wat, the layout of temples often mirrored celestial constellations. Some matched Orion, others Draco. A few even mapped the Milky Way itself. But not as it appears today, as it would have looked thousands of years ago. These findings pointed to a deliberate, ancient effort to mirror heaven on earth. Someone long ago tracked the sky with incredible precision, and then built on a monumental scale to reflect it. But who and how? The official answers didn't satisfy these researchers, so they searched deeper. Some traveled to remote islands. Others studied forbidden manuscripts. A few compared oral traditions from isolated tribes. And the more they looked, the clearer it became. Someone was here before. Someone knew the stars, the earth, and the cycles of time. When they shared their work, the reaction was swift. Smears, cancellations, careers ended quietly. Atlantis, it seemed, had many defenders, but not in academia. Others tried to bring attention to the myths themselves. These were anthropologists who believed that oral traditions were not just symbolic, but historical. They studied flood myths, sky gods, and ancient warnings passed down in rituals. They noticed the uncanny precision with which indigenous stories matched real events. Volcanic eruptions, comet strikes, tidal waves. These tales were not fiction. They were encoded memories. Survivors of ancient disasters passed them on generation after generation. These researchers proposed a radical idea. Maybe Atlantis wasn't a single city, but a memory encoded across human culture. An echo of a lost civilization, scattered in language, symbol, and ritual. But that interpretation was rejected. Myths, they were told, could not be history. Yet when these anthropologists pressed on, they were removed from grants, stripped of credibility, and reassigned. All for daring to believe that ancient humans had remembered something that the rest of us had forgotten. Geologists got involved next. Some noticed that strange land formations, once believed to be natural, might actually be artificial. Massive terraces, pyramid-shaped hills, and underground caverns that defied simple geological explanation. In South Africa, Brazil, and Indonesia, formations resembling ancient megastructures stood untouched by modern study. When geologists presented findings suggesting they may be man-made, reactions were swift. Institutions refused to fund further digs. Universities threatened tenure. Their maps were rewritten, their findings unpublished. One by one, these experts fell silent, not because they were wrong, but because they were inconvenient. Atlantis was more than a word. It had become a boundary. Step too close to it, and everything you worked for was stripped away. The pattern was clear. It wasn't science that failed these thinkers. It was the gatekeepers of science. The ones who had built walls around what was allowed to be real. The same fate awaited engineers and architects who examined ancient sites with a technical eye. They looked at the precision of stone cuts in places like Pumapunku, Egypt, and Baalbek. They measured tolerances so fine they rivaled modern machines. Stones weighing hundreds of tons, moved and placed with a precision we can barely replicate today. They asked the hard questions. How were these built? With copper tools and ropes? How were 800-ton blocks lifted and stacked without cranes? Their answers didn't fit the official timeline, so they were cast out. Their work labeled speculative. Their methods questioned. Never mind the evidence. Never mind the mathematics. They were treated as heretics, not for what they proved, but for where their conclusions pointed. If the ancients had such technology, it meant they inherited it. From who? Atlantis, perhaps. And just like that, another voice was silenced. Some researchers even connected the dots between ancient maps, seafaring knowledge, and architecture across continents. They suggested a maritime civilization that traveled far and wide. They proposed that the same builders who raised temples in the Andes may have influenced those in Egypt, Mesopotamia, and beyond. They noticed that pre-Columbian societies had knowledge of distant lands, that ancient ships may have crossed oceans long before recorded history. Their evidence was strong: identical symbols, aligned temples, botanical similarities. But again, it was too much, too disruptive. Atlantis wasn't just a lost city anymore. It was becoming a lost culture, a global one, and that narrative had to be stopped. Their books were labeled fringe, their speaking engagements canceled. They were branded as fantasists, despite basing everything on data. Because when that data pointed toward an inconvenient truth, it didn't matter how solid it was. What mattered was control. This didn't happen all at once. It happened slowly, a whisper here, a retracted article there. Researchers moved to other fields, or left science altogether. Their work lingered, unread, in dusty corners of academia. Atlantis became a curse word. Mention it and your career ended. The machinery of modern scholarship moved to protect its walls, not from lies but from truth too big to handle. It wasn't that Atlantis had no evidence. It was that the evidence was everywhere, and the story it told threatened to collapse the neat structure built over centuries. A story where humans rose, fell, and rose again, where memory survived only in stone, myth, and whisper, and where a flood didn't just drown cities, but drowned the voices of those who remembered them. But not all were silenced. Some kept writing. Some turned to independent platforms, podcasts, underground conferences, and private expeditions. Their audience grew. People began asking questions. They visited the sites, compared the maps, connected the dots for themselves, and slowly the cracks began to show. The forbidden historians were not gone. They had become something else. A new wave, a movement. They were no longer chasing Atlantis. They were resurrecting it, not just as a place, but as a symbol of everything we've forgotten, everything we've buried, and everything we've been told not to look at too closely. Their work is not finished. It's just beginning. And in that persistence, the truth starts to rise again from the shadows where it was buried. In the next chapter, we turn to the maps. Not modern ones, but ancient scrolls that show coastlines lost to time and islands that no longer exist. Maps that predate the tools needed to create them. Maps passed down from a time long before ours. And in those maps, we may find the fingerprints of the very civilization that vanished beneath the sea. Atlantis may not have left monuments, but it may have left directions, hidden in plain sight. Chapter 6: Ancient Maps, Hidden Codes. Long before GPS and satellites, there were maps, drawn by hand, carved on stone, painted on parchment. And some of these ancient maps tell stories we were never meant to read. They show places that shouldn't exist, islands that no longer rise above the waves, ice-free coastlines buried today under frozen deserts. And at the heart of it all lies a question no one dares to answer. How did ancient people know the shape of lands they never set foot on? Who passed this knowledge to them? The Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513, depicts South America and Antarctica with shocking accuracy. But that's just one of many. Others show submerged lands, vanished rivers, and mountain ranges we only rediscovered with satellites. These are not lucky guesses. They are fingerprints of something older, something global. If Atlantis was real, maybe it did not vanish completely. Maybe it left behind instructions, coded messages in the maps themselves. And those messages are beginning to speak again. One map shows Antarctica without ice. That alone breaks the timeline. The southern continent was officially discovered in 1820, but the map in question is centuries older. Even stranger, it shows the interior topography beneath the ice as it would look today with modern radar. This means the mapmaker either flew over Antarctica or had access to information that should not have existed. Scholars argue it was copied from even older maps. But no one can say who drew the original. That silence says everything. Because if the data came from an ancient civilization, one that mapped the world long before ours, then Atlantis becomes more than a lost city. It becomes a lost cartographic power, a culture that measured coastlines, recorded ocean currents, and stored their knowledge on scrolls, walls, and tablets. When their cities drowned, their maps survived, carried by sailors, hidden in monasteries, and copied generation after generation until the world forgot their origin. But the maps didn't forget. In medieval Europe, monks preserved strange maps that showed more than they should. Islands that would later be swallowed. Landmasses that now rest beneath the Atlantic. Scholars dismissed them as myths, but satellite imaging later confirmed the ocean floor once had higher ridges, now submerged. These features match lines on ancient maps, places once drawn as islands or coasts. Someone, thousands of years ago, was recording rising seas. Their knowledge wasn't speculative. It was precise. These weren't the sketches of dreamers. They were technical documents. And the deeper we dig, the more it looks like the original mapmakers were watching the world sink. What if Atlantis didn't just fall? It documented its own death. What if these maps are warnings, not just records? Coordinates left behind by survivors. They weren't trying to preserve geography. They were trying to preserve memory. Because when cities drown, stories wash away. But maps endure, silent messages waiting for someone to finally see them for what they are. Consider the Orance Fine map of 1531. It depicts a southern continent connected to South America, with rivers and mountain chains almost identical to those beneath the Antarctic ice. This was drawn centuries before modern geology, but its accuracy rivals today's cartography. Where did this data come from? Mainstream answers say it was guessed, but guesses don't explain the detail, or the alignment, or the recurring accuracy across maps from different cultures. What does explain it is transmission, knowledge passed down, preserved like a secret too dangerous to lose. Some historians now believe ancient sailors may have traveled global routes. They didn't just explore, they mapped, and those maps were treasured, copied, and protected. Some made it into royal libraries, others vanished in fires, floods, and wars. But enough survived to show a pattern. Someone long before Columbus or Magellan knew the world. And if they knew the world, they likely had a capital, a center, a city of knowledge. Maybe that city was Atlantis. Let's go back even further. In Mesopotamia, Babylonian tablets show astonishing knowledge of astronomy and geometry. Some depict star charts so accurate they rival those of modern times. Others use sophisticated mathematics to track the moon and planets. But there's something else. Fragments of world maps etched into clay. They hint at a wider awareness. Not just local geography, but a sense of global order. These tablets were not isolated works. They came from schools, temples, and archives, institutions designed to preserve knowledge. The same kinds of institutions Plato claimed existed in Atlantis. Could the Mesopotamians have inherited their knowledge, passed down from a seafaring people, a vanished empire, one that once sailed west across the Atlantic, mapping coastlines and archiving their findings? These are not wild theories anymore. They are questions based on data we can see and touch. If Atlantis was real, this may have been its legacy. A cartographic lineage, scattered through time like pieces of a puzzle waiting to be reassembled. Ancient Egypt offers another clue. On the walls of temples and in papyrus texts, we find references to maps, star paths, and sacred directions. The Egyptians built their monuments in precise alignment with celestial events. The layout of the Giza Plateau mirrors the Orion constellation. The Nile's flow was tracked and measured with unbelievable accuracy. But who taught them this? The Egyptians themselves said their knowledge came from earlier times, from a forgotten age. They spoke of Zep-Tepi, the first time when gods walked the earth and gave wisdom to humankind. Maybe these weren't gods. Maybe they were survivors, refugees from a sunken kingdom who brought maps, calendars, and geometry with them. Maybe Atlantis didn't disappear without a trace. Maybe it left behind blueprints, hidden not in vaults, but in temples, ruins, and ancient scrolls. Not in plain sight, but just close enough to be found. If only we dared to look beyond the veil of accepted history. Even Polynesian navigators tell a story that aligns. They used star paths, ocean swells, and cloud patterns to travel thousands of miles. They memorized vast ocean routes without compasses. Their knowledge wasn't written, but passed orally across generations. And it worked. They mapped the Pacific with such skill that modern sailors still study their methods. But where did it come from? Some traditions speak of lands that vanished beneath the sea. Others hint at ancestors who came from a place of great knowledge, long lost. If Atlantis seeded civilizations, this could be a remnant, a maritime echo of something older. Their maps weren't drawn on paper. They were etched into memory, passed from navigator to navigator. If even one line of knowledge traces back to Atlantis, then its legacy did not drown. It simply changed form. The sea may have taken the cities, but the instructions survived. In boats, in mines, in stars. And they're still out there, guiding those who remember. There are patterns in these maps, unmistakable ones. A shared obsession with certain latitudes. Repeated alignments with solstices and equinoxes. Sites built along invisible lines, later rediscovered as ley lines or energy grids. These patterns suggest that ancient mapmakers weren't just recording space. They were aligning with something deeper, a global system of geometry, a planetary code. If Atlantis existed, it may have been the first civilization to master this system, a society that understood Earth as a whole, its rhythms, its cycles, its forces. and they embedded that understanding into maps, monuments, and city plans. This knowledge wasn't mystical. It was mathematical, practical, powerful. And when the flood came, it didn't just wipe out buildings. It severed the link to that system. What we have now are scattered remnants, hints and shadows. But enough remains to trace the outline. Enough to suggest that the ancient world was mapped far more completely than we've been taught. And Atlantis may have held the master key. When European explorers set sail in the 15th and 16th centuries, many already had maps showing lands they were yet to discover. Some captains claimed to inherit maps from older sources, Byzantine libraries, Moorish scholars, even Templar archives. These maps were handed down like treasure, their origins forgotten or deliberately hidden. What if these were the last copies of Atlantean charts? Scraps of an ancient global atlas that survived the fall? These maps didn't just show coastlines. Some marked magnetic anomalies. Others traced wind patterns or deep ocean currents. Data we only confirmed centuries later. It's as if the mapmakers understood the planet in ways we're only beginning to rediscover. This isn't fiction, it's documented. Maps that should not exist, yet do. If Atlantis created them, then it wasn't just a mythic kingdom. It was a civilization of scientists, of observers, of record keepers, and what they recorded still whispers from beneath ink and parchment, waiting to be decoded. Even the Mayans left clues. Their calendars tracked celestial cycles with astonishing precision. They predicted solar eclipses, tracked Venus, and built their cities in alignment with cosmic events. But what's often overlooked is that some of their carvings depict lands across the ocean. Lands with unfamiliar animals, unusual architecture, and stories of a great flood. Could their ancestors have come from one of these lost lands? Or met survivors who did? If their knowledge came from Atlantis, it would explain how they built such an advanced society so quickly. They didn't invent civilization. They inherited it, passed down like a spark from a fading fire. Their maps, though symbolic, carry meaning. They point to somewhere else, somewhere older, and if decoded correctly, they might help us find the source. Because the truth about Atlantis may not lie in what we've built, but in what we've preserved. And in maps, preservation is everything. They are time capsules, and the code is still intact. Today, we have access to satellite imaging, LiDAR, and deep-sea scanning. And yet, the ancient maps still show things we missed. Sunken plateaus, hidden trenches, submerged cities. The more we overlay them with modern data, the more matches appear. Coincidence or confirmation. The maps don't lie. They were drawn from somewhere. Some are thousands of years too early to exist, but they do. That leaves one conclusion: a forgotten source. A base map drawn in antiquity and copied over centuries. Atlantis may have been that source. A place where cartographers and astronomers worked together. A city whose legacy outlived its ruins. Not through monuments or weapons, but through maps. Quiet, powerful maps that slipped through the cracks of history. And those maps are still speaking. To those willing to listen. To those brave enough to follow the lines no one else dares to trace. In the final chapter, we follow those lines all the way to the present. What if someone already found Atlantis? What if the evidence was collected, analyzed, and locked away? In military zones, restricted data, and unexplained cover-ups, we uncover the chilling signs that the truth is not just lost. It's hidden. Atlantis may have surfaced, but someone chose to bury it again. Chapter 7. The cover-up that never ended. It always starts the same way. A strange anomaly, an unexpected discovery. A research team eager to dig deeper. And then nothing, silence, reports vanish, excavations are halted, access is denied. Across the world, in places where lost civilizations might be uncovered, a disturbing pattern emerges. Sites that match the description of Atlantis are quietly wrapped in military fencing, labeled as protected zones, or buried beneath infrastructure projects. These are not coincidences. They are strategies, a careful erasure. When people get too close to the truth, someone steps in. Whether it's governments, corporate interests, or unseen hands, the result is always the same. Promising research is shut down. Theories are dismissed as fringe. And the public never hears what was almost found. Atlantis may have resurfaced more than once, but instead of celebration, it triggered fear. Because if the legend is real, everything changes, our history, our origins, our sense of who we are. And not everyone wants that change to happen. Take satellite imaging. In recent years, independent researchers have used open-source data to explore regions the mainstream avoids. The Rick Hat structure, submerged ruins in the Caribbean. Even the continental shelves once exposed before the sea rose. Many of these scans revealed geometric patterns, squares, circles, roads. Not natural formations, man-made. But when these findings reach official channels, they're dismissed. Or worse, the data is suddenly reclassified, blurred, or removed entirely. Governments claim national security. Archaeologists claim coincidence. But why would ancient ruins be a threat to security? Unless, of course, they challenge the foundation of our world history. That's when it becomes dangerous. When ancient stones threaten modern power. And those who try to push further often find themselves silenced. Their funding disappears. Their careers crumble. Not through violence, but through discrediting. Through ridicule. A slow, suffocating censorship that makes sure no one takes them seriously. And the deeper the evidence cuts, the stronger the hand that buries it. In 2003, an underwater anomaly was discovered off the coast of Cuba. Sonar scans revealed massive symmetrical structures. Walls, rectangles, even what looked like pyramids. The site covered several square miles. The depth suggested it had been underwater for over 10,000 years. Too early for any known civilization. It made headlines briefly. Scientists were intrigued. But almost overnight, the buzz stopped. Media outlets dropped the story. The researchers who made the discovery, they stopped speaking publicly. The sonar scans were never officially released. To this day, the site has not been fully explored, and no explanation has been given. That silence is louder than any denial, because this is how the cover-up works. Not by shouting it down, but by starving it of attention. By ensuring no one with influence dares to ask more questions. Atlantis didn't just vanish underwater. It was drowned again, this time beneath bureaucracy, fear, and deliberate suppression. The lost city became a forbidden subject. In Egypt, unexplored chambers beneath the Sphinx have long stirred debate. Seismic surveys detected voids, hidden rooms no one had known were there. The possibility of ancient scrolls, forgotten technologies, even first-hand records of civilizations before the pharaohs was suddenly real. But before any excavation could begin, restrictions were imposed, access denied. Only select government-approved archaeologists were allowed near, and even they were not permitted to drill or enter the voids. The official reason, preservation. But what exactly are they preserving? A chamber no one has even entered? Or a version of history that must not be challenged? If Atlantis once influenced Egypt, this could be the link, the bridge between the myth and the monuments. But the door remains closed, because opening it might reveal truths too large to control. And in a world built on stable narratives, too much truth is dangerous. So instead, the chamber stays sealed. The mystery remains untouched, not because it must, but because someone decided it should. Then there's the matter of the Vatican archives, a library so vast, so secretive, that even historians with credentials must request special permission to see specific documents. Within its depths are scrolls from the ancient world, maps older than most libraries, and texts rumored to describe pre-flood civilizations. Why is this material hidden? The Church claims it is to preserve delicate documents, but preservation doesn't require concealment. It suggests protection from ideas, from questions. Some researchers have claimed they were denied access after requesting texts that mention Atlantis, flood legends, or pre-Adamite civilizations. These claims are hard to verify because the system is opaque by design. What we know is this: there is knowledge under lock and key. And if even one scroll contains reference to an ancient advanced civilization, then Atlantis may not be a myth, but a suppressed memory, held in the hands of those who write doctrine and define reality. Knowledge, after all, is power, and sometimes the most powerful thing is keeping it hidden. Even academia, the realm of open inquiry, plays its part. When someone proposes a theory outside the accepted timeline, they are quickly marginalized. Journals reject their papers. Universities distance themselves. Colleagues call them unscientific, not because of what they found, but because of what it might mean. The idea that a global civilization may have existed before recorded history threatens everything, from textbooks to careers. And so, the peer review system becomes a gatekeeper. Only ideas that reinforce the current model are welcomed. Anything else is pushed into the shadows.
Label de pseudoscience, fringe, crackpot.
The scholars who push too far are often forced into obscurity. Their work lives on in online forums, self-published books, and whispers on the edge of accepted thought. But they persist, because the truth, even buried, does not die. And for every voice silenced, another rises, asking the same question: what are they so afraid we'll find? Military bases in strange locations add another layer. In places where ancient ruins should be, there are restricted zones. Islands with buried structures are declared off-limits. Mountain ranges with anomalous shapes fall within weapons testing areas. Underwater ruins lie beneath naval training zones. Is it coincidence that these sensitive locations overlap with potential sites of ancient cities? Or are they using secrecy to hide something deeper? Some whistleblowers claim recovered artifacts have been stored away in secret facilities. Others suggest that underwater drones have mapped ancient structures never disclosed to the public. Sounds like science fiction until you look at the data, until you realize how many discoveries are made and never spoken of again. These areas aren't guarded to protect the public. They're guarded to protect a version of history, one that keeps Atlantis in the realm of myth. And so the lost city stays lost, not because it cannot be found, but because it must not be acknowledged. Even the media plays its role. When underwater ruins are found, headlines flash for a moment, then disappear. When researchers propose controversial theories, they're mocked as conspiracy theorists. Late-night television caricatures them as tinfoil hat eccentrics. The public laughs, and with that laugh, the topic is dismissed. Curiosity is killed by ridicule, and the cover-up tightens its grip, not with force but with culture, with a system designed to make the unbelievable seem ridiculous, even when it's real. Atlantis has been buried not only by water and time, but by jokes, memes, and skepticism weaponized. A society taught to mock what doesn't fit will never ask the right questions. And those who control the narrative know this. They don't need to erase the evidence. They just need to keep you from looking. And the best way to do that is to make the truth look like fiction, to turn revelation into entertainment. So no one takes it seriously, even when they should. Throughout history, when knowledge threatens the established order, it is hidden, burned, locked away. Atlantis fits that pattern perfectly. A civilization that suggests humanity was once far older, wiser, and more connected than we were taught. If proven, it would upend everything: religion, science, national identity. Suddenly, the modern world wouldn't be the pinnacle, but the recovery. And the elite, those who profit from power built on controlled knowledge, would lose control. That is the real threat. Atlantis is not dangerous because it's a myth. It's dangerous because it might be true. And truth, when it shifts the balance of power, becomes the greatest threat of all. That is why the ruins remain untouched. That is why the data disappears. That is why the legend was buried under ridicule. Not because it was nonsense, but because it wasn't. And they knew that if enough people started asking questions, the dam would break. But cracks are forming. Independent researchers are mapping old coastlines. Divers are discovering temples beneath the sea. AI is scanning satellite images and detecting patterns too precise to ignore. The technology once used to hide the truth is now revealing it. And every day, more people start to see. They ask why a structure shaped like Atlantis lies in the Sahara. Why city ruins rest beneath the waves. Why maps exist that should not, and why so many voices have been silenced. It's not just about finding Atlantis anymore. It's about confronting the system that hid it. And as that system begins to fray, something incredible is happening. People are remembering. They are seeing the old stories with new eyes, connecting the dots, and realizing that the legend was not just a story. It was a memory, faded but never gone, because the truth always leaves a trail. And now we're finally following it. So what happens next? That depends on us. The cover-up can only hold if we stop asking questions, if we stop looking. But if we keep digging into the maps, the ruins, the forbidden zones, something will eventually give. Atlantis was not a fantasy. It was a chapter in human history erased by water and rewritten by those who feared its truth. But that truth is rising again. In sonar scans, in suppressed documents, in the cracks of the official timeline. And once it surfaces completely, there will be no turning back. The real Atlantis was found, but it was covered up. Now, the only question is, what else have they buried with it?